not gonna lie, sometimes a game just crushes me. Usually that's something like a strategy game, where your first hour is going to be just learning how to play. But sometimes it's a situation where I spend 40 minutes, to pick an arbitrary number, just trying to beat the first stage. It happens, and I can't avoid it. So we're not going to see a whole lot of the game, I'm afraid. But fortunately, Double Dragon 3 is a belt-scrolling beat-em-up, so it's not like there's a lot to explain. Skipping over the arcade for just a moment, the reason that Double Dragon 3 exists is because Americans love the first two games. In fact, the Famicom and NES versions released almost simultaneously. Of course, as part of that, the Famicom version got the NES's absolutely punishing difficulty, but I'll get there in a moment. The arcade Double Dragon 3 is often pointed to as the game that invented microtransactions. I don't think I'd go that far. There were several games before it that directly converted quarters to health, for example. Though it was the first time that you could just pay money to purchase a special item. Fortunately, that's not implemented in the Famicom game. In fact, other than the story, the Famicom game is very different from the arcade. The plot is that a fortune teller just walks up to Billy and Jimmy Lee and goes, "Oh, you guys think you're pretty hot, huh? Well, I bet you don't have 3 Rosetta Stones." And they reply, "Of course we don't, there's only one of them and it's in the British Museum." But they head off around the world anyways in search of them. They've changed the control scheme once again for Double Dragon. B kicks and A punches. Hitting both simultaneously will make you jump into the air, and there's a few moves that you can only do while jumping. Hitting B while moving in the air will do a jump kick, and you can bounce off a wall and jump kick after it for extra damage. I only got that move to work once. If you jump straight up and hit B at the top of your jump, you'll do the spinning kick. If you jump over an enemy and hit A and B again as you're going over them, then you can grab them and flip them. If you double tap in a direction, you'll run. You can't attack while running, and I found that sometimes it just triggered even when I didn't want it to. The controls are often unresponsive, which would be what resulted in that unwanted double input. These problems extend to the weaponry. You hit A to pick up a dropped weapon, but sometimes you just won't pick it up. Sure hope there aren't any enemies coming at you when that happens. Weapons go away when the enemy that was initially carrying them dies, so it's a real use-it-or-lose-it situation. In Double Dragon 3, you have 1 life and no continues. Well, that's what you start with. Eventually, you get additional people on your team, and if one of them dies, then you can continue with a different character. You also get 1, and only 1, continue if you make it to the 4th stage. There are 5 stages total, and they are very short, theoretically. If you fight your way straight through, they take only about 2 minutes each. But Double Dragon 3 has really cranked up the difficulty. Once you've been knocked to the ground, you'll tend to get knocked back down over and over again. Because of that, any blow you receive could easily result in a significant loss of health. And for that reason, you don't want to engage with punches and kicks. If you do that, you're going to get hit. So you pretty much have to just use jump kicks, and the spin kick in particular, which has some tight timing, but it is your most effective attack. The only way that you recover health is by completing a stage. I made it to the boss of the 2nd stage, which is the first character that will join your party if you defeat him. That's Chen the Kung Fu Master. The 3rd stage is in Japan and has you fight a ninja as the boss, and that character Ranzo will also join you. You can switch the other characters by hitting select, and that's also where you can equip a character's special weapon. You have a very limited number of attacks with that weapon before it goes away though. The Lee brothers get nunchaku, and it's about as strong as your spinning kick. One weird problem I noticed with Double Dragon 3 is that although some areas are long multi-screen affairs, all of the enemies in an area will come at you at once. So unless you're right on the edge of something, you're generally better off just staying in one place, beating everyone up, and then once everyone's knocked out, making a long march to the exit. It's just bizarre to me that they don't space out the encounters in these areas. There is a 2-player mode, of course, because what would Double Dragon be without double dragons? And there is a Mode A and Mode B, with Mode B being where you can injure your fellow player. I get the impression that the game really was designed around having two players take it on simultaneously. And that's everything you need to know about playing Double Dragon 3. Beat up, guys? Go to the right? And it's crazy hard, probably a direct response to the rental market in the US. As you might expect for a game that was only released because the US market loved it, Double Dragon 3 doesn't seem to have had a lot of impact in Japan. It's mainly remembered for its utterly hostile design. Well, that and how the instruction manual is a comic. It's kind of bewildering how after Double Dragon 2 did just about everything right, that Double Dragon 3 does virtually everything wrong. The flow of the combat's been changed here, so it all feels a bit more stiff and unnatural. The interface is flaky, and that's always an enormous problem for any video game. And you're basically locked out of enormous chunks of the game until you've essentially mastered it. Once you reach Stage 3, having an additional character makes everything much easier. Double Dragon 3 ends the series on the Famicom in a way that heralds the overall decline of the series. At least eventually there was a direct sequel to the Famicom trilogy, because this would have been a pretty awful note to go out on.